Dr. John Bergsma, thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So what I want to talk to you about today is the existence of God, and I want to bring that down to the individual level and what that means for us on a daily basis.
Right.
You teach a class on this. You've written books on this.
Right.
You know the arguments. So I want to start with, if someone was struggling with belief in God, doubted that God was real, or that belief in God, or believed that belief in God was illogical, irrational, or just a crutch for those afraid of death, where would you start to try to persuade a modern person like this?
That's a great question. What I often do is I give people a video called The Privileged Planet.
Okay, we can put that down in the show notes.
Yeah. It's produced by a group called Illustra Media with the help of some scientists from the Discovery Institute. I think it was Jay Richard and Guillermo Gonzalez were the main scientists. Well, one's a scientist, one's a philosopher that were behind that. But what they do, it's a very beautifully made video, and it's only an hour long. And I find that people can understand stuff on video. We're like a video culture these days. And so if I give somebody a book, they might never get to read it, but people are more likely to watch something visually. You can also rent the video on Amazon for like $2. And the video just goes through what's called the fine tuning of the universe. Just the amazing fact that all of the numbers and the formulas that describe how our universe operates are set at these incredibly precise parameters. People talk about German engineering, right? Well, the divine engineering of the universe, makes German engineering look incredibly sloppy. So everything, and you know this well. I've read that chapter from the book that you're working on, Zach, and you point this out. Things like gravity, things like the speed of light, all of these values need to be exactly what they are. Otherwise, we don't get a universe that can support life. So take gravity, for instance. If you tweak it up just a tad, by like 1 part in 10 to the 37th, which is 10 followed by 37 zeros. So a very, very, very small number. So you just tweak it up just a tad. And what happens is, right after the Big Bang, the universe immediately recollapses into a big crunch, and you never get a life-supporting universe. If you tweak it down just a tad, and again, by like an infinitesimally small, an unimaginably small number that has to be written very exactly by scientific notation, if you just tweak it down just a tad, then you get a universe that just expands and all you ever get is gas. Gravity's not strong enough to form planets or stars. So to get a life-supporting universe that expands at the right rate, where the gravity doesn't cause a big crunch immediately, but is strong enough to form planets and stars that eventually people can live on, etc., requires an incredibly precise value for the force of gravity. And this is true of light as well. If you tweak light just a tad up, you get a universe that's too hot and it sterilizes everything and you never get life. You tweak light, the speed of light, just a little bit down, and you get a universe that's too dark and cold and you never get life. And this is true of all of the fundamental forces of the universe. And there's more than 40 of these fundamental forces and formulas, and a lot of them are much more exotic and esoteric than most of us talk about, on the street level. Like, we're familiar with, say, light and gravity, but then there's things that, physicists talk about, like the strong and weak nuclear force and all kind of exotic stuff that's going on in the quantum physical level, which is the very small level. And all those values have to be exact, and on and on and on. The more you look at it, the deeper it gets, and the more exact and precise it gets. And so what you see is that our universe was clearly designed for life. The idea that all of these values just, happen to have, the right number attached to them in order to produce a life-supporting universe by chance. Nobody really believes that. There's really only two options out there. People that know the area and that understand it well. There's basically two ways you can go. You can either concede that there's a creator and that's what I think is the rational thing to do. Or you can go with what's called the multiverse, and you can pretend that there's an infinite number of universes, and therefore, since there's an infinite number of universes, it's not remarkable that just one of them happened to have all of these values line up right. It's kind of like the idea of, well, you pull the one-armed bandit an infinite number of times, and eventually you'll hit the jackpot kind of thing. The problem with that is there's zero evidence for any other universe than our own. And so at that point, you're taking this huge leap of faith. And this is what I find ironic, is because a lot of people get into atheism at the initial level, like when they're teenagers. There's like, I don't want to have a faith in anything. I want to just, I'll only believe what I can touch and what I can verify, and, I'll only believe in matter and energy because that's rational and that's demonstrable, et cetera. And so when people are teenagers, they get into this science-y kind of mindset, and then they want to not believe in God because belief in God, in their view, requires faith, or requires belief in things that aren't physical and demonstrable. But then on the back end of that science-y mindset, you end up fleeing into a fantasy that's called the multiverse, which is just a fantasy without any data behind it, without any support, where you're literally believing literally in everything and anything rather than God. Because an infinite multiverse is basically the definition of believing in everything and anything. And so, that's the irrational. And in philosophy, which is kind of disciplined thought about the world, there's a principle that's called Occam's razor, which is the idea that when you're thinking about the world, you ought to try to use the most economical theories to explain what you observe, and try not to have overly elaborate theories that aren't required and that don't have support behind them. This idea of an infinite multiverse where we have all these universes, and therefore we don't have to be surprised that ours just happens to have all these right values that support life, et cetera. That is the ultimate violation of Occam's razor, because it's the most, you're believing in an infinite number of realities that have no proof or no verification to explain one reality, the reality that you experience. And so it's the least economical theory to explain what you're observing. Whereas a creator, which is a simple, so to speak, concrete, I have to define what I mean by concrete, but it's a simple kind of theory, and kind of right on the surface, and one that's been very common, and one that, in fact, most human beings have embraced throughout world history. That's right there in your face, and rather than accepting that simple explanation for your reality, you're flying off into this unverifiable fantasy of a multiverse. So, I mean, and here we're getting ahead of ourselves, but, we're going to talk for a while, but one of the points that I'm going to continue to make is, and what I made on, when I was interviewed with Matt Fradd about this subject a couple months ago, atheism in our modern culture is really a flight from the evidence. The evidence in every domain of science, the evidence in every domain of human intellectual activity points to a creator God. It points to a meaningful universe. And when you really get down to it, atheism is a flight from this evidence, an effort to seek some other explanation besides the explanation that is the most obvious. So, and that's the case with creation. So again, getting back to your question, it says somebody's doubting God, somebody's doesn't believe that there's a God. I often start with this video because it's very accessible, very easy to understand video, very beautifully done, kind of persuasive and easy to follow, which kind of presents an initial argument that, look, the universe itself points to some kind of all-powerful creative intelligence. So that's a start. And the video, this Privileged Planet video that I use, doesn't appeal to any religious texts or religious authority. It's just like looking at the nature of reality and asking the question, what's the best explanation for what we see?
Yeah, and I mean, especially when you especially when you bring it down to like that's not the only evidence that there is
No.
for a creator.
No.
And I think that the almost the inspiration of wonder and awe about our planet, about our universe, is a pretty effective argument, I guess you can say, even if you're not claiming to know precisely what the character and the nature of that creator is. I think just inspiring that sense of wonder and awe is effective, right? Like, I mean, even you have, I want to quote Stephen Hawking here, because I think this kind of speaks to what that kind of inspiring that wonder and awe and the mystery of things. I think this quote speaks to that. But I mean, when we go back to the Big Bang, and Stephen Hawking did this in a lecture that he entitled "The Beginning of Time," and he says events before the Big Bang are simply not defined because there's no way to measure what happened at them. Like, we know that there is a reality that exists outside of our observable, can be measured by science universe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we know that there's another
the
dimension.
Big Bang.
Right.
Yeah. Is there something? Yeah. And this is why the Big Bang was resisted. And it's a really interesting intellectual history. And you go back to the scientists that were involved in coming up with Big Bang theory, you find that several of them, most notably Albert Einstein, resisted the evidence that was coming in pointing to a world that had a beginning. And the resistance was really for religious and philosophical reasons. Einstein was not comfortable with a universe that pointed so strongly to a God, to a creator, okay, what do we mean by God? Well, some all-powerful, very intelligent being or reality that is outside the universe. And one of the arguments that I like and I find very persuasive personally for the existence of God is a classic argument that goes back to medieval times called the Kalam argument. Mm. It's very simple. It basically just has a couple of premises and a conclusion, but the first premise is that everything that comes into existence has a cause other than itself. And I think if people think about that for a while, can kind of see that that's basically self-evident. Mm-hmm. Something appears, things can't self-cause because they can't exist prior to their own existence in order to be a cause, and a cause has to exist prior then to
Where did you come from? Where did your parents come from?
Exactly.
Where did they come from? And so on.
Yeah, so
that can't continue on infinitely.
Right. And so anything that comes into existence has to have a cause other than itself. And then we discover through modern science that the universe came into existence. It has not been here forever. Nobody's defending that in contemporary physics, like an eternal universe. The math to it doesn't work, et cetera. So Big Bang is still pretty much standard, although the Webb's telescope is challenging aspects of it, but not the basic model. And so the universe has come into existence. And so you conclude, okay, well, the universe is one of the things that has come into existence, so it must have a cause other than itself. What does the universe consist of? Well, the universe consists of matter and energy, all matter and energy, and time. We should say time is an element of the universe. So all matter and energy and time came into existence at the point of the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, so to speak, because it's hard to conceptualize that because there wasn't even time before the Big Bang. Or outside of the Big Bang, we could say, there must be some cause. The only other option is to say, well, the universe is causeless. And if you go that route, that's like the ultimate irrationality. You just throw it up your hands and you say, there's no reason for anything. It's just a big, inexplicable accident for no reason at all. Everything came into existence, and that's a worldview that leads to irrationality.
Yeah. So have you read Bill Bryson at all?
No, I haven't.
A Short History of Nearly Everything. So there's a couple quotes in here that I really like, but I want to read this excerpt to you and then have you respond to it. But because this is speaking to the Big Bang, he says it's natural but wrong to visualize the singularity, which is that point from which the Big Bang began to expand. It is natural but wrong to visualize the singularity as kind of a pregnant dot hanging in darkness, hanging in a dark, boundless void. But there is no space, no darkness. The singularity has no around it. There is no space for it to occupy, no place for it to be. We can't even ask how long it's been there, whether it has just lately popped into being like a good idea, or whether it has been there forever, quietly awaiting the right moment. Time doesn't exist. There is no past for it to emerge from. And then he says, and so from nothing, our universe begins.
Right.
But it's interesting that we can't measure, we can't study or observe. So everything that science measures, space, time, energy, matter, didn't exist prior to the Big Bang.
Right. And it's amazing how that correlates because, we go back to the great thinkers of the Catholic tradition in the Middle Ages and Thomas Aquinas and so on. And the way they define God, God is not matter, God is not energy, God is not bound by time, he's outside time. They understood that. They figured that out through reasoning and with the help of revelation from Scripture. And they saw that. And so now we come to the point in modern science where we realize that everything that's bound by time and everything that manifests matter and energy all had an origin, and it must have a cause, but that cause has none of those properties. The cause of the universe has to be outside time, apart from matter, apart from energy, fitting the classic definition of the deity from these pre-modern thinkers like Aquinas, and it's just amazing convergence to me. So and I find it very compelling. And another thing I want to say about this, Zach, is people are going to criticize and say, well, Bergsma grew up as a Christian, and so Bergsma just sees everything through Christian glasses and stuff like that. And that's why I like to point out it's not just religious believers that feel the force of this. It's atheists themselves, atheist thinkers. And if you read enough of the atheist literature and enough of the scientific literature, you find these quotes where they admit that the argument is pointing towards a divinity. You mentioned Stephen Hawking. Probably his most famous book is A Brief History of Time. And in that, he talks about fine-tuning that we talked about with these cosmological constants and stuff like that. And the idea, he admits that you could interpret that as evidence for a creator. He mentions that, and then he moves on. He doesn't follow up, doesn't explain why he doesn't accept it as evidence. He doesn't argue against it. He's like, oh yeah, that does look like evidence for a creator. Moving around, like, wait, stop.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal. If that's evidence for a creator, let's talk about that. That could have life-changing implications. And he just walks on. Another thinker that I like to quote a lot, who went to his grave kind of conflicted and feeling like he was unable to accept the reality of God, even though the evidence seemed to be pointing there, was Robert Jastrow, who was the rocket scientist of rocket scientists during the great space race and the Cold War and so on. He was head of, I think it was the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, like the kind of the premier rocket research, high-tech stuff for the U.S. government. And Jastrow was at the head of that agency from like the 60s through the 80s. And he personally witnessed during his career the shift from scientists believing that the world was eternal to believing in the Big Bang theory. And he knew many of the players in that whole intellectual drama personally, and watched their discomfort with coming to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning. And therefore, unless you're going to take the irrational position that there was no cause, which, like, how can something not have a cause, especially everything have no cause, then you have to conclude that the cause is outside of space, time, and matter, something like the classical definition of God. Mm-hmm. And so he admits that. He wrote this whole book called God and the Astronomers. And he admits that the Big Bang Theory implies that there is a God, and it virtually proves that there's a God. But at the end of the book, he's like, well, but I'm not comfortable accepting that conclusion. And he just leaves it. He lived in this tension, He wanted only to believe in matter and energy. That felt science-y for him. And so he was caught. And there's these wonderful interviews with him on YouTube, and they're still out there that you can find him, where he'll be interviewed and he'll just admit that he lives torn between this evidence that points strongly to God and then his natural inclination to just want to believe in matter and energy, and like he can't seem to resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I like about that, Zach, is it shows that here's a man who's not a religious believer, who did not grow up in any kind of, in a religious family, et cetera, who's like a hardcore scientist, who just looks at the data just objectively and says, yeah, it looks like it points to a creator. But I still can't accept it, So that's not bias. It's not bias. The importance of that is it's what's called in legal terminology, that's called testimony against interest. Like if you're a prosecuting attorney in court, the best kind of evidence that you can have to make your case is where you can get, for example, the defendant to admit to facts that incriminate him, because the defendant wouldn't willingly admit to that unless he was just compelled. Okay, so that's called testimony against interest.
Mm-hmm.
To somebody like Robert Jastrow, who isn't inclined to religious belief and didn't want to come to that conclusion, for him to admit that Big Bang Theory and the whole cosmology that goes along with it points towards a creator, that's huge because it's massive testimony against interest. Mm-hmm. And he's not the only one. There's dozens and dozens, really hundreds of major intellectuals and scientists who've said similar things based on the observation of different aspects of creation, whether it's biology or quantum mechanics or cosmology. All the branches of science point towards the creator in stunning ways. And you can often, if you pick through the literature, you can often find these moments where non-religious scientists will just admit that, yeah, this looks like a creative intelligence.
Mm-hmm. So as far as the initial question, to that person who is struggling, that initial argument that you would give would be the fine-tuning of the universe.
Yeah, that's a form of a design argument. It's, if people are familiar with Aquinas' famous 5 ways, it's the fifth mm-hmm. way, which is the argument from purpose or design.
Okay.
And purpose and design come out to be the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say are the strongest atheist arguments against that? I think I've heard, because of the variety and how many planets there are, of course one could turn out to be able to support life, or the multiverse theory, as you mentioned. If there are an infinite number of universes, then of course one would be able to support life. Eventually you would get a one life supporting universe. Right. Those are the arguments that I've heard against fine-tuning.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take let's first address there's a ton of planets argument. Even if you take the number of estimated planets in the known universe, and add up that number, which is very large, but then you that's the numerator, but then there's a divisor, underneath. Mm-hmm. And you have to calculate that number. And when you do the math, the number of factors that have to be correct in order to have a life-supporting planet still dwarf the number of planets that there are in the known universe. So it'd still be highly, highly, highly unlikely to ever get a life-supporting planet, even though there are so many planets in the universe. And we can do the math, and if somebody wants to dispute that, we can sit down, we can get into the tall weeds of that argument. Mm-hmm. But it's just so mind-boggling when you multiply, that's just for, planet Earth, everything has to be right. We didn't really talk about the fine-tuning of the Earth. We talked about the fine-tuning of like the universe a minute ago. But if we start talking about the fine-tuning of the Earth, so many factors about the Earth have to be correct. The Earth has to be exactly the right distance from the sun to have a climate that supports liquid water, doesn't boil off the water or freeze it all up. That's very delicate to get that right. And we're the only planet in our solar system that does, or the only known planet in the universe that gets that right. So you got to be exactly the right distance for the sun. You have to have a large moon, just about the right proportion and size of our moon in order to stabilize our orbit. Otherwise, all kinds of bad stuff happens. You have to have the right proportion between land and water on the surface. I mean, we watch Star Wars, and there's like these ocean planets that have no land, or desert planets like Tatooine or whatever, and Star that they're all desert. That would never work. Those are not life-supporting planets. That both those planets would be sterile. You have to have the right proportion, and the proportion has to be basically what it is on Earth, which is roughly 30% land, 70% water. If you vary that much in either direction, you get a vicious cycle that leads to death or a sterile planet. So again, so many things have to be right. You have to have the planet has to be the right size. We have to be grateful. Like our planet can neither be much larger nor much smaller than it is. Mars is a little bit smaller than Earth. Mars is, I forget the exact figure, but the problem with Mars's smaller size is that it cannot hold on to an atmosphere. So Mars looks like it used to have an atmosphere, but it's been stripped away because its gravity it was not strong enough to hold on to it. So the Earth is bigger than Mars, and we're able to hold on to our oxygen and nitrogen atmosphere. That's a really good thing, and not only that, we have enough gravity to hold on to that atmosphere, but then also our atmosphere has exactly the right mixture of gases that you want for highly active respiratory biological beings like ourselves. We have just enough oxygen, for example, for us to breathe adequately. If you had a touch more oxygen in our atmosphere than we do have, things would spontaneously ignite too much, and you'd have runaway wildfires that would burn up the whole Earth. If you had slightly less oxygen than we have, then it'd be very difficult to have highly complex, highly active biological organisms like the human being that's moving around, thinking, aggressive, acting quickly, all that stuff. It'd be hard to have that with lower oxygen levels on the Earth. So, and then our nitrogen, 80% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. That's great because nitrogen just calms everything down. Sorry. Nitrogen is fairly unreactive, and it dampens chemical reactions, and that's actually great because it keeps the Earth calm, keeps runaway chemical reactions from taking place that would like burn up or dissolve or whatever, the planet or life forms. So all of this, so the Earth is finely tuned for life, and its position, its size, its gravity, its even our magnetic field. If we didn't have the magnetic field that we have on the Earth, then the solar wind would strip away our atmosphere. We'd have no air to breathe and everything would die. So we need our magnetic field that we have. So everything about the Earth, we need it.
Yeah, I mean, even the placement of the other planets within our galaxy and it all of that matters.
Yeah.
As far as supporting a life-supporting planet.
We need Jupiter. Jupiter is like a lineman in football, blocking the defenders because we have comets and all kinds of debris flowing into the solar system that could easily strike Earth and wipe us out. But Jupiter, with its huge gravitational field, and Saturn helps out too because it's pretty big too. They just kind of attract, most of the damaging stuff and absorb it. And Jupiter doesn't mind. It's so huge. I don't know, what was it, like 10 years ago, we watched some kind of huge asteroid smash into Jupiter. It was really dramatic, and we got fantastic images of it from the telescopes on Earth. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was a great example of, being a blocker for the Earth and taking a hit for the team.
Was that the James Webb? Is that
no? This is before the James Webb Space Telescope went up there, but I forget the name of the asteroid that struck Jupiter, but it got tore apart by Jupiter's gravity, and we got these great images of it burning up as it hit Jupiter's atmosphere.
So basically, Jupiter's the lead blocker.
Exactly, like the fullback that you set up through the line, and then the tailback comes up behind. Exactly. Yeah, for the Earth. So that's a good analogy. There's so many things that we need, and the more that we study, the more that we realize that not only do we need the Earth the way it is, but we kind of need our solar system the way that it is. And I wouldn't be surprised by the time we get done studying the solar system that we realize that, for life to exist on Earth, we need all the other planets that are in our solar system. I bet they're all doing something that is helping us out, actually. And we don't understand it all yet, but the more we understand it, we're gonna see that this whole thing is contrived.
Right. Right. And so, I think that's the point. So all this to say that it was contrived.
Right.
And it shows that something intelligent
is behind this.
Must be behind it.
This is not an accident, right?
Because it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like it has to have been caused by something or someone outside of our physical universe and what we can observe. So it has to have been caused by something.
Right. Yeah.
What do scientists say that? I mean, we spoke to it a little bit, but the multiverse or a creator. I mean, are there any other options?
There's no other options. And that's, what I get to my students is an article from Discover magazine from, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago called a multiverse. It's called The Multiverse, Science's Alternative to a Creator. And of course, Discover magazine is one of the most popular science magazines in the U.S. for people that are kind of like have a sciencey hobby. And I used to subscribe for years, and I love the magazine. I find it interesting, and I love to read. One of the reasons I love reading Discover magazine is because most of the articles point to a creator, but the journalists writing the articles are clueless about it, and it's so funny to read these things and look at the evidence and just kind of chuckle to yourself that they're just like kind of willfully blind that they can't see this. But anyway,
it's effective evangelism.
Yeah. But this article from, I don't know, 12 years ago or something like that, in Discover magazine, The Multiverse, Science's Alternative to a Creator. I love the article because in it, these people that are, professional scientists in various fields, cosmology, physics, chemistry, etc., they admit that basically when you look at the fine-tuning of the universe, you either have to conclude that there's a creator who fine-tuned it, or you have to believe that there's an infinite number of rolls of the dice. Because nobody seriously thinks there was one roll of the dice and we just hit it. We nailed it because the chances are so absurd. What kind of chances are we talking about? Well, the numbers are so large that, you at 10-point font, you need like billions of Earths to write out the chances of 1 in 10 to the, it's the Penrose number is actually what's usually cited. And that was, Roger Penrose is this, he's a British astrophysicist. And he calculated that just to get the what's called entropy, which is the amount of disorder in the universe, or the balance between order and disorder in the universe, the initial conditions of our universe had to be so precise. Imagine it this way. Imagine designing a bomb such that it would go off and all of the explosion would go in a completely flat plane. Nothing would fly up, nothing would fly down, etc. Things would just only, go in like a two-dimensional plane when you set the bomb. That would take incredible engineering to design a bomb that would only do that. That is a little bit of an analogy of the Big Bang, because the character of space-time is that it's largely flat. We're living in what's called a flat universe, not a flat in a two-dimensional sense, but a flat in a three-dimensional sense. It's just really hard to conceptualize in our minds. And I can't really conceptualize it, but it's a mathematical quality that scholars use to describe, how the math works in our universe. So our Big Bang, exploded not two-dimensionally flat, but it exploded three-dimensionally flat. And that's incredibly hard for for a burst, to do that. That has to be so controlled. That has to be so precise. Okay. And anyway, so Roger Penrose, who's a physicist that works on these kind of problems, he calculated, what are the chances of having a universe that's so precisely ordered that when it so to speak explodes, and we're speaking metaphorically here, because the Big Bang wasn't technically an explosion, right? But we think of it that way. Mm-hmm. But when it burst, however you want to, whatever language you want to use, when it came out of that singularity and started spreading out, so that it was so precise that it had this quality of flatness about it. The chances of that is 10 to 10 to the 153. Okay, that's when you're putting exponents on your exponents, if people know math, I don't know how much math people have had, but I went up through calculus in high school, and when you're putting exponents on your exponents, you're talking about huge numbers. And I worked this out one time, and I was like, I calculated that if you wrote that out in standard notation, like you wrote out all the zeros, you would need like 1 billion surfaces of the earth to write that in a 10-point font. Okay. So that's such a huge number. So one chance in a number so large that would take 1 billion earths to write it on.
1 billion earths.
Yeah, to write the number. And we're just talking about writing the number. And that's not like to manifest the number, because writing it is smaller than actually manifesting it. Mm-hmm. So there's only like 10 to the 90th, fundamental particles in the whole, known universe. And so the number of like quarks and electrons and photons and, fundamental particles is much smaller than the Penrose number. So you could really say that our universe is so fine-tuned that every photon, every electron was planned. More than that, it was like over-engineered. Every single photon is over-engineered in our universe in order for us to have a life-supporting universe. And Penrose was just working on the entropy, which is like the amount of order versus disorder in the universe. So he's saying it's highly ordered when it's exploded. And that's just one factor. You got other factors like gravity and speed of light and all these other cosmological constants that would increase the Penrose number. So it's not, it's as if God, or this cosmic intelligence thought about every single trajectory of every single photon and electron in the whole universe from the very beginning and guided it, It's that engineered, it's like getting into a Bentley where like everything has been thought of, where these massive luxury cars that cost you $5 million, where they exactly tailor it to you, and you get in. They thought of everything. It's soundproofed, and there's like your favorite beer is in the cooler when you touch the button in the back seat, all this kind of stuff. We live in like a Bentley universe that's just like amazingly over-engineered for us.
Yeah, you mentioned in one of your books that it's like if you walked into a house that had all the furniture that you wanted, all the rooms were painted the colors that you wanted. Color. You would walk in and be like, somebody knew that I was coming.
Exactly. Yeah. You would not say, oh, this is just a happenstance,
Right.
What a freak accident,
Yeah.
The fridge has my favorite beer. All the rooms are in my favorite color. The pillow is just the firmness versus softness that I like. You'd say, no, somebody who knows me very well was expecting my arrival. And that's what we have on planet Earth and in our universe.
So it seems as though, the common atheist statement that you hear is, where's the evidence? Show me the evidence. But it seems
the evidence is everywhere. All the evidence is pointing this way. Like I said, atheism is a flight from this evidence. It's a flight into a fantasy world. And so it's like, oh yeah, all the evidence is pointing that this all looks contrived. This all looks like from a creator. So let's flee into, unproven, unverified, not evidential fantasy that like there's just there's an infinite number of universes and we just happen to be lucky. And it's like, that's not rational. That's not based on evidence. That's why I say that's so ironic, because usually atheists begin their path of atheism because, like, I only want to believe what's based on evidence. But you follow that line of thought, you follow that trajectory to the end, and you wind up believing in an infinite multiverse that has no evidence at all. And then the multiverse is ridiculous because if there's an infinite number of universes, then you get all kinds of, then that means that there's a universe out there where the South won the Civil War, and there's a universe out there that's populated by pink elephants, and there's a universe out there where Marvel superheroes really exist, and all this absurd, crap. It's a bunch of science fiction in the truest sense of the word.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so then you have Thomas Aquinas, and you have Aquinas's arrow and the archer.
Right.
So you have what Aquinas observed was that the governance of nature, the laws, and how things in the universe work toward an end or a purpose. And unintelligent objects, like an arrow, cannot work toward a purpose without an archer, without an intelligence guiding them.
Right.
So how does that relate to our universe and our earth, and what is the purpose that everything is, towards what purpose is everything working towards?
Right. Yeah, those are great questions. Well, we observe that, take the earth, has all these special properties that make it optimal for life. Okay. And let me also specify something, Zach, because I get this objection from people. They think, well, life will adapt to any condition, and so we shouldn't be shocked that life on earth is adapted to the conditions on earth because life adapts to the conditions that it has. That's a bunch of crap, okay? It's just not true. The periodic table of elements in this universe that we live in can only provide for life based on carbon, okay? There's only one kind of chemistry to build living things that is possible with the principle, with the physics and the chemistry that we have in this universe that we're living in. Okay, so if you are going to have a living thing in this universe, any part of this universe, any galaxy in this universe, the only element that you can build a living thing off of is carbon. And the reason for that is carbon is the only element that will make virtually infinitely long chains of make a molecule that is indefinitely long. You can keep chaining carbon to itself again and again and again. You can make these long strings. And that's necessary for life because you need a lot of information to make a living thing. Everything has to be programmed. That's what our DNA is. Okay. So our DNA is a program that specifies, I would say all the features of our body, but that's actually not quite true. There's information embedded in other places, but most of the features of our body and the function of our body.
It's the instructions for building the proteins, which create
the proteins. The proteins are actually nanomachines. People don't realize that. People think that protein is like a substance that you consume to get healthy. Like I need to eat a lot of protein, but actually, what proteins are is nanomachines that go around. They do things like move fuel from one part of the cell to the other where it can be consumed, or move trash out of the cell, and so on. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all the instructions for a living thing are coded in DNA, but DNA is built on carbon, and DNA is very long because it has to encode a lot of instructions, and you can't do that based on any other element. So then carbon has a very special relationship with oxygen and with hydrogen. And carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen combine together to make these special kinds of molecules that we call carbohydrates, which are necessary for life. And the atomic values and the way that those elements chemically interact make life possible, and no other set of elements will do that. You can't just I'm going to take silicon, I'm going to take gold, and I'm going to take silver, and then I'm going to make a life form. No, you can't do that. Okay, and no other combination. No, you can only do it with carbon, and then with carbon's friends, which are oxygen and hydrogen, and then carbon has other friends as well, and we actually need a lot of the elements we need A lot of the elements we need only in small amounts. Like we need arsenic, actually. Human beings need arsenic to live, but only a very small amount. And we all know if there's much arsenic, then you die. But we do have small amounts of arsenic that is doing like very important things in our body. So, living things are very complicated. And the chemistry of our universe only permits, as I said, building animals off of carbon. Nothing else will work. And then carbon has a very special relationship with liquid water. And liquid water only exists between 0 degrees Celsius and 100 degrees Celsius, or 32 and 212 if you're using Fahrenheit. So that gives you a very small range of temperatures. So that means that in this universe, there's only one range of temperatures, and there's only one basic element, and that basic element has friends, etc., as that we talked about. Like there's only one kind of chemistry, and there's only one kind of biology that's possible in this universe. So as we look out in our solar system, you can observe that there's a lot of planets and moons in our solar system. Jupiter, you got Saturn and Jupiter have moons, etc. And then, Pluto and Uranus and all those stuff. Hey, there's nothing living on any of those other planets, guys. Mm-hmm. Life did not adapt to the conditions of Venus. Life did not adapt to the conditions of Mars. Life did not adapt to the conditions of Uranus because it can't. Mm-hmm. There's only one set of conditions that will support life. Mm-hmm. And it's a set of conditions that's realized on Earth and realized on no other planet that we know of in the whole universe. Mm-hmm. So don't tell me that, it's unsurprising that life, adapted to the conditions of Earth because life will adapt to whatever conditions it has. No. Look around us, people. The whole universe outside of our planet looks like it's dead. And that's because there's only one set of conditions that will support life, and that's what we have realized here. So now I forgot how we got into this, but I just want to make that point because people will use as an art, like, it's unsurprising. Like, we shouldn't be surprised by this. Life will just, if it's a colder planet, life will be just, based more cold. Or if it's a planet full of silicon, then life will be based on silicon. Like, no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we get off on this in the first place?
It was Aquinas' arrow in the earth. So the purpose. So everything within our universe is working toward a purpose. And it seems as though that purpose is life, is to support life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what blows physicists' minds, and they don't usually realize it when they begin. In high school, they like blowing things up in the chemistry lab, and so they get into science. Like, cool, I want to go be a chemist and blow things up, and that's kind of adolescent. And then they get into the chemistry field, and they get deeper and deeper, and then later in their career, especially once they get tenured and they don't have to worry about like the climbing the rat race in the scientific world or the academic world, they start thinking back and getting reflective. And then oftentimes these scientists who started off very atheistical at the beginning when they were teenagers or whatever, look at this like, wow, this is incredible that we live on this planet where all these parameters, these unlikely parameters are met, and we have liquid water, and we got the right temperature, and we got a moon, and we got this gravitational field, and we got a magnetic field, and all this stuff. And they start to wonder and start to awe. Like, there's a couple of guys, Ward and Brownlee are their last names, who wrote this book called Rare Earth. And they're not religious believers, but they just go through all the properties of Earth, and they just, express this awe. So it looks like there's a purpose. It looks like there's purpose to the Earth. Looks like the Earth was designed to support life, and not just any life, but like intelligent life and complex life, of which we human beings are the pinnacle, obviously, because we dominate the Earth. We control the Earth. If we wanted to, we could wipe out all the other species. We don't, because that would be stupid. And we recognize that they're valuable and they're beautiful and they have intrinsic worth, and so we don't. But that's part of the wonder is why are we so gifted with this intelligence that we can recognize that these other creatures that could be perceived as competitors, to us, why do we just not why aren't we stupid and just shoot them all? Well, we have this gift of intelligence that we recognize, that they have value, so we don't even do the things that we could. We can say, the bears and the pythons and everything are our competitors, and we should just wipe them out. But no, we're gifted with, the wisdom to recognize the value, and so we care for the rest of creation, actually. And we set aside national parks for them, and We try not to abuse the environment because we recognize its beauty and its value and that it's connected to us and all these things. Like it, and Earth is set up for us. It's like a home for human beings. So yeah, so it looks like it has a purpose to it. And what is the purpose of the universe? The universe seems to be set up to support life on this planet, not just any life, but intelligent life. And the reason why I like to use this Privileged Planet video that I spoke to you about earlier, Zach, when people are like, is there a God or not, is because one of the things that this video points out is that you have this amazing convergence in our universe between the factors that you need for life and the factors that you need for observation of the universe. So let's give a couple of these. If you want to support life on a planet, you have to have an atmosphere basically like the Earth's. But it also just so happens that an Earth-like atmosphere is clear, that it does not impede visible light. You can see visible light through our atmosphere very well. And that is absolutely necessary in order to see the rest of the galaxy and see the rest of the universe and build telescopes and look out there and then begin to understand how the universe operates. So that's an amazing coincidence between a fact that you need for a living thing and then a fact that you need for observation. Another amazing coincidence is that if you want a life-supporting planet, you want to be close enough to the galactic center that you have access to heavy elements like iron, and then even nuclear elements, like very heavy elements like uranium and plutonium and so on, that are important for our planet and important for the development of civilization and so on. Those kind of heavy elements are only found close into a galaxy. And they become increasingly rare as you move out to the edges of the galaxy. On the other hand, you don't want to be too close, because if you're too close, there's a lot of explosions and a lot of high energy reactions taking place in like supernovas towards the center of our galaxy. So you need to be kind of in a Goldilocks zone in our galaxy where you have some heavy elements, but you're not close enough that you're being exposed to supernovas and other kind of life-destroying events. And again, this is our planet. We're located in an arm of our galaxy, of our spiral galaxy, where we have, just the right balance between distance from the bad stuff and proximity to the heavy elements that we need. And then that is also the best position to be in order to see the rest of the galaxy and observe it. Because if you were close in to the galaxy, to the galactic center, everything would be too bright. And so your field of vision would be obscured by all of these suns and stars and everything and supernovas going off. And so you'd be blinded by the light, and then if you were too far away, you couldn't get a good angle on it. And you'd be too far to make, precise observations about the stars that are around us. And also you'd be too far out to not have those heavy elements that you need to develop an advanced civilization. So we're just in the right spot that we need for both life, again, and for observation. And anyway, I can't repeat the whole, argument from memory, but this Privileged Planet, it's both a book and a video. The authors, Richards and Gonzalez, just go through step by step with like 25 of these amazing coincidences where the factors you need for life are also the factors that you need for observation. So it looks like our universe was contrived to support life and to support observation. In other words, to allow for living things like us who would then look up at the stars and ponder, why are we here and what's the purpose? And in other words, to begin to reflect on God. And it's almost like the Psalms, because in the Psalms, like Psalm 8, David, the shepherd boy, writes this poem about 3,000 years ago. And he's looking up and he says, Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You've set your glory above the heavens. What is man that you are mindful of him? What is the Son of Man that you care for him? You create your hands created the moon and the stars and all things, And so, so our universe looks like it was designed to allow for life, and then for conscious life, for life that can observe the universe and then come to a state of wonder and ask the question, who placed me here? And then enter into a relationship with that creator.
Mm-hmm. So if the purpose of life is to create an intelligent,
or the purpose of the
being,
universe,
the purpose of the universe
right,
is to create life, which then evolves, and maybe we can get into that, into intelligent life. An effective atheist argument is that God is not some old man in the sky. And it almost like making that argument makes God seem absurd, I guess you can say. And I guess that's effective to the modern mind, who might be like, yeah, I don't know that it, like, I'll admit this, like, even in, like, with that argument, even in my own prayer, sometimes I'll be like, what am I praying to? Like wondering what the nature of God is. And you write in one of your books, so whatever put us here is a whoever. It's not a something, but a someone.
Right.
Not a higher power, but a higher person.
Right.
And I want to just ask you a question, like, what we talk about God as an intelligence, as a creator.
Right.
What does that, and then we read that we're made in the image and likeness of God.
Right.
What does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? Does that mean that God is a human being like me and you in this other dimension that we're talking about? Or is the nature of God more like something like a mind or a rationality?
Right. Yeah. Well, the fact that we're made in the image and likeness of God, if you're talking about the Bible, that's really, image and likeness is really the language of sonship. So if you look at Genesis 5:3, for example, it says that Seth was that Adam begot Seth, or fathered Seth, a son, and Seth was in the image and likeness of his father Adam. So that language of image and likeness, I mean, we could talk about what that means philosophically, but when we're talking about the Bible, that also means something, theologically and personally. It means a family relationship. It means that the Creator wants to enter into a family relationship with these creatures of His, and that He made us for that. Okay, and this is a huge shift in worldview. Okay, because the worldview of the atheist is that matter and energy are primary, and that eventually matter and energy evolve into creatures, and these creatures evolve consciousness and personhood. And so consciousness, the mind, and the reality that we call personhood develops out of matter and energy. Oftentimes it's thought to be some kind of epiphenomena of the brain or something like that. So what's primary is matter and energy, and then matter and energy eventually produces mind. There's strong scientific reasons to believe that that's absolutely false. And if you want to run through those reasons, we can. But for now, let me just say that the biblical worldview and the Christian worldview is precisely the opposite, is that at first there was mind, and then mind gave rise to matter and energy. And matter and energy comes to being in creation, and then mind created other minds to be united to matter and energy. In other words, souls united to bodies, okay? So there's strong reason to believe that mind was there first. Mind is a non-material reality. It's ridiculous to deny the existence of mind. And many people have pointed this out, even secular thinkers. Again, like Roger Penrose will admit that mind is something different than matter, and it's got to be causal. Otherwise, it wouldn't have any effect, and it would never have evolved. But there's other reasons to believe that mind is causal. Here, I'm getting myself. I'm running off on a rabbit trail and confusing myself. But anyway, let me get back to this. So the biblical and the Christian worldview is that mind is first, and then mind calls matter and energy into existence. And then later, after the development of matter and energy, mind produces other minds that are united to matter and energy. In other words, souls are placed into bodies of human beings. Well, the Big Bang supports that, because the Big Bang says that all matter, energy, and time came into being at a certain point and must have been therefore caused by something which is outside of matter, energy, and time, which would be, mind or consciousness.
Yes.
And the fact that our universe is so designed, like it's so intentional, and finely tuned to create life, implies that whatever caused it, so to speak, knew what it was doing, had an intention, okay? And only minds can have intention. Inanimate objects can't. So it strongly looks like there was a mind that pre-existed matter, energy, and time. And if that's the case, then mind doesn't evolve. Like, mind has always been there. Another line of evidence that strongly points in this direction is quantum mechanics. And this is the science of the very small, of the very fundamental. And what you have in quantum mechanics is, like, when you're talking about subatomic particles like electrons and photons, this has been known since the 1920s. Their behavior changes depending on whether or not they're being observed by a consciousness. Okay. If you observe them, and usually that means, and practically speaking, if you try to measure them, then the subatomic particles will behave as particles. But if you're not observing them, they behave as waves. And this has been demonstrated, many, many times. There's famous experiments.
How do they know that?
You didn't know that? Like, this is not taught. It's not taught in the schools. And the reason,
how do they know that? How do they?
Well, how do they
if
know?
They're not observing them. How do they know what they're doing?
Nobody knows how it knows. This is the craziest thing. And these.
So the subatomic particles know whether or not they're being observed.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense. I mean, it's. I mean, we use that language. But to say that they know that they're being observed, is to attribute consciousness to them. I would prefer to say that it appears as though they know. What I think is going on is that all of nature observes a kind of law, a kind of decree, which is that if particles are being observed, they must behave as particles, and if they're not, they can behave as waves. And all of nature seems to observe that law. And it's a law that even breaks the laws of space and time, because it's true of entangled particles. Like, what you can do in physics is you can split a particle into two particles that have half the energy, but are then what's called entangled, which just means they're in resonance with one another, and whatever happens to one will happen to the other. And then you can send these particles out. You can shoot them away from each other, and then a long time later, when they're very far apart, you can do something to this particle over here, and it will instantaneously affect, faster than the speed of light, it'll affect the entangled particle over there. And that is mind-blowing, and what that demonstrates is what physicists call non-locality. It's that the behavior of particles are not limited to local circumstances. So the nature of the space-time matter nexus that we're in is much more crazy than we used to think. It's and people that really work on this, many of them are moving to the position that essentially the universe that we live in is something like the Matrix. The Matrix is where you have these minds, and these minds are all connected to one another in a kind of virtual reality. But the minds are kind of primary and the virtual reality is, but that is basically how our universe is. Like what is fundamental is God's mind, angelic minds, demonic minds, your mind, my mind, and then our minds are interacting in I don't want to call it a virtual reality. It just is a reality. It's a reality, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But we could liken it to a virtual reality where, there are laws that God defines for the interaction of my mind with your mind, and it's through, matter and energy and so on. And this is a virtuality where we are interacting, but it is a matrix for the interaction of mind, and what is fundamental is mind. Mind pre-existed the creation of the material universe, and mind is more fundamental than matter and energy. And ultimately, it's mind that defines matter and energy. Because you get down to the really, really small, and what you end up with is particles that basically have no mass. What they are is just like points in space with defined mathematical properties. And some physicists and cosmologists that worked at this come down to say, what is fundamental is information. These particles are moving around. They have no definite position. They have no definite mass. They're just a field of mathematical possibilities. When they're observed, what's called the wave function, or the field of possibilities, collapses onto a specific location, etc. But it's not really matter how we think of it at the macroscopic scale. It's just like points in space that have defined mathematical properties. Mm-hmm. And so it comes from bit is what the statement, it from bit, mm-hmm. It means like stuff that we experience comes from bit, which means information. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have points of information defined at the subatomic level that all, combine to create this, material world that we experience. Mm-hmm. But information is something that minds do. Information is something that minds process. Material things don't comprehend information. They can be programmed to process information, but they don't really comprehend information. Mm-hmm. So if it's really true that it is from bit, which is that matter is from information, then that too strongly points to a mind being at the foundational reality, mind being the foundational reality of everything that exists. And a lot of people realize this, and some physicists take this in the direction of tradition of like Christian theism, and they say, the fundamental mind is the personal mind of the Christian God. Some physicists, go into Eastern thought and say the fundamental mind is more like the impersonal Brahman of Eastern religions. But among some of the best and the brightest of the physics world and the philosophical world, they realize the implications of this, and they move in those directions. But like the founders of quantum mechanics, famous people, like everybody knows Schrodinger's cat, right? Cat in the box, and does he die, from quantum mechanics? So it's part of popular culture, and people joke about Schrodinger, I think it's properly pronounced Schrodinger, but I often hear people say Schrodinger. But Schrodinger was one of the founders of quantum mechanics, and he admitted that consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness is irreducible. It is a fundamental aspect of reality. John von Neumann, the guy who actually came up with the formulas that quantum physicists still use to predict the behavior of subatomic particles, he did all the fundamental math that's still being used to this day to do that. John von Neumann was convinced too that consciousness was fundamental to the universe, that you cannot reduce consciousness to matter and energy. It is like an existent thing. Heisenberg, likewise, these other great foundational physicists of the early 20th century that whose work gave rise to nuclear physics and the bomb and power plants and everything. Spectacular stuff. They worked on it close up, and they founded this field, and they realized that the implications of what they were working on, the fact that these particles will change behavior based on whether a consciousness is watching them, they realize that applies that consciousness has always been here. You need consciousness for the world to work. If there is not an observing consciousness, the particles will not resolve and like actually end up doing things. So you need something like a divine consciousness to interact with the universe. And people that only study physics superficially or don't get very far into it or don't think about it theoretically may never like encounter these questions. But the folks that founded the field of quantum mechanics or quantum physics, they grappled with the philosophical implications and realized that. So there's a lot of reason to think that mind is prior to matter, that mind gives rise to matter. That's a more rational explanation for the universe that we exist, that we're living in than the alternative.
So this fundamental mind, fundamental consciousness, this is what we mean when we say God, when we use the term God. This is what we're talking about.
This is what we're talking about, right? Yeah, God. Yeah, this is as Christians we would want to say a lot more.
Sure, but I'm just saying fundamentally.
Right. Fundamentally, yeah. If you look in Romans 1, St. Paul says, look, humanity is without excuse because ever since the beginning, God's essentially his fundamental nature, his power, his intelligence, and so on, you can discern that from the creation. Now, you can't discern everything about God from creation. There's mysteries about God, like the Trinity, for example, that God has to reveal to us. But the basic properties of God, you can discern from observing the creation. And but what we say as Christians is it's more than that. Not only is there a God who is a mind, and is disembodied, it doesn't have a material body, but he does have a will, and he's powerful, and he's outside of space, and he's outside of time, all those kinds of things. That's true. But then this creator, God, is not just some kind of impersonal force, but he wants to enter into a personal relationship with you and I. In fact, that's why he created us, so that we could enjoy him and come to know him and just be ecstatic in his presence for all eternity. And he sent, and he came, let's put it this way, he came and took on our nature to talk to us about this, and that's who we call the God-man, Jesus Christ.
So what, this mind, this fundamental consciousness became a human being, and that's what
took upon
is.
himself. Yeah, took upon himself human nature in order to communicate to us, so that we would not be intimidated by him.
In order to communicate with us, in order to show us the way to live and show us the way to God.
The way to himself.
To himself.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you put it like that. But yeah.
Well, when we read in John, I think that's where love comes in. So God is love. And when you think about when you are filled with love, the consequence of that, the natural consequence of being filled with love is wanting to share that love with another.
Right.
So if God is this creator, this mind, this fundamental consciousness that created everything, and he created everything in order to share it with a creature or a mind that was just like him, that's what love would be. And then it makes sense to say that God is love because that's the reason that we were created.
Right. Yes. Love by its nature wants to share.
Right.
And
share its life.
Share itself.
Itself.
Share with somebody else.
Yep.
You can't have love, like if you could imagine a universe that only had one being in it, can't really have love there. Because love requires at least two persons, someone to love and someone to be loved, at least, So, and love is a personal quality. Like rocks don't love, trees don't love, tables don't love, only persons can love. Robots can't love. So that's part of what it means to be made in the image of God, is that we're persons, and so we have this capacity for thought, but especially for love. Okay, so this is this is, that's huge. And so, as we understand God as Christians, we'd say that, God didn't need to create the world in order to have something to love, because he's tri-personal in himself. So he has more than one person in his essence. And so those persons of the Trinity were always loving each other and giving themselves to each other.
So by this fundamental mind, fundamental consciousness, is this what it means when we say, because we have that as well, because we have a mind, because we're conscious? Is that what it means to say that this is what it means to say that we're made in the image and likeness of God? Is that what
part
that
of
means?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's part of it. So one of the things that we share, we resemble God, and one of the ways that we resemble God is that we too are conscious and that we're persons. So persons have have thoughts and a will and emotions. Those are characteristics of persons. Inanimate objects don't have that. Animals only have those things to a limited degree. So human beings are persons, and so it makes sense that God is a person. And some people go for an impersonal God. I don't know what they always mean by that. I think some people, when they say, "Oh, I believe in God, but I don't believe in a personal God," some folks, I think, mean that they think that there's some kind of force that gave rise, like the Force in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is a force doesn't have intentions. A force doesn't think. A force doesn't have a will to it. And what we see when we look at our universe is that this looks intended, this looks contrived. So whatever produced it appears to have purposes, it has intentions, it's got a will. Those are qualities of a person. So that's why I reject the idea that, God is impersonal, if you mean in the sense that God is some kind of force. Others, when they say God is impersonal, I think what they mean is that God has no emotions. And, God is like Spock, or the Vulcans or something like that. Is like impassive and rational. I reject that, because when we have persons that have no emotions in our experience, we regard them as having a disability.
Mm-hmm.
And we even have names for different disabilities of people that are kind of like unmoved by anything.
Mm-hmm.
So we regard that as a deficit, actually, if you don't have proper emotions. And if our Creator has no emotions, then it would seem that we are greater than our Creator. And that's a logical problem, because an effect can't be greater than its source or its cause. So I do believe that God has emotions, although we need to qualify that philosophically, and we'd have like what emotions are in God would probably be different than they are in us, and we're a reflection of that. But when we talk about, we say that not only does God have love, okay, which is not merely an emotion, but it has an emotional component to it, okay. We say that God is love in its fullest sense. That involves affection, that involves desire, and but that's not what it is fundamentally. It involves that. Fundamentally, what it is willing the good of the other. But even Benedict the 16th, talked about this. It says, that this implies there's desire in God, that he desires to be in relation with us. But anyway, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And since, again, to recap, what I've been trying to say, our universe looks like it's contrived, like it was intended for something. Only persons can have intentions, can will things, can design things. So I don't think that the cause of the universe is impersonal. I think the cause of the universe is personal. And I don't think that the cause of the universe is some kind of Spock-like, detached, disembodied intelligence that doesn't care, because again, we would regard that as being defective, and our cause should be much more than us, not less than us. And so
when you say person, do you mean like sitting here like me and you? Like, what do you mean when you say person?
Person, A person is a being who has an intellect and a will and something that we would regard as like an emotional capacity, affections, so mind, will, and affections.
So you wouldn't say body? You wouldn't?
No,
use the term
body is not necessary.
Interesting.
And this has been attested even in human experience, because there's thousands and thousands of cases of near-death experiences where people have been parted from their body and have continued to have thoughts and intentions and emotions. And we also have the well-attested phenomena of exorcism. There's been many documented exorcisms. As people doubt that, I point them to it. There's a video was done by the Indianapolis Star newspaper back in 2014 where they heavily documented an exorcism that took place in Gary, Indiana. And it's very easy to get on YouTube. And so I turn people to that if they think that exorcisms aren't real. But there's been so many documented exorcisms.
You like to scare the crap out of people?
Yeah, scare the hell out of them, quite literally. So come to heaven.
Literally.
Yeah. But in exorcisms, you see disembodied intelligences, and these demons are persons. They've got thoughts, will, and emotion, but they don't have a body. And then there's angelic intelligences as well that are disembodied. So a body is not necessary to be a person. Mm-hmm. Now, human beings, our natural state is to have a body, but it's not necessary to be a person. So God is a person, but do not believe that God is a body. God calls bodies into existence. Mm-hmm. And God is super personal. He's tri-personal. This is what's revealed to us in Scripture, which makes sense. He's multi-personal, which is more than us. So the cause should be greater than the effect. We're just mono-personal, mm-hmm. But He wants to invite us into a relationship with Himself.
Mm-hmm. So then God created everything intelligently for a purpose, creating life.
Right.
Creating us, intelligent life.
Right.
To be able to find Him, come back to Him.
Right. Yeah. So he creates creatures that are also persons. And this is part of what it means to be in His image and likeness. But there's more to being an image and likeness, as I said. Biblically speaking, it's made for a child relationship with Him. He's a father, and we are children. And this is not something that we, different philosophers. This famous European philosopher named Feuerbach, who talked about this and said that we project human fatherhood onto God. Like we have this sense that there's this great power out there, there's this great intelligence out there, and then we begin to describe him like a father, and that's called projection theory of religion. The Bible says no, it's the other way around. That God is a father, and his fatherhood towards us is truly what fatherhood is. And then God made human sexuality and human fatherhood and motherhood and the reality of being a child, all that biological reality. God made that as a reflection of His fatherhood, of His being the great parent. Okay, mm-hmm. And so His relationship to us, that's true fatherhood, and it's like the fatherhood that I have towards my children, but my fatherhood towards my children is an imitation of the true fatherhood, which is divine. Mm-hmm. Okay, so God creates all things out of His love. So we believe He's a circle of self-giving love, tri-personal. Each person always gives himself to the other persons, and there's no potentiality in God. God is fully kinetic, which means like He's always act. He's always moving, and because he's this flow of love from one person to another. That's his nature. And so love wants to share. Love wants to give. Love wants to share something with others. So we look at a beautiful sunset. We're like, I want to call my wife to see this so that she could share this with me. You know, that's the nature of love. Love wants to share these good experiences. And so God is happy in himself because he has the sharing of the tri-personal God. There's no lack in God such that, I need to create so that I have something to love. He loves within himself unselfishly, but wants to, because love is gratuitous. It's like, I don't need to create, but I want to create. So others can share my love. And so he creates beings like himself that could share his love. So the more the merrier. I mean, it really is truth. The more love wants more. Love always wants to multiply and to share itself.
And the evidence of love is choice, is the fact that we have the choice as to whether or not
that's right.
to love God.
Yeah, I get this question all the time. You know, I teach about the creation story from Genesis in my Bible classes. And just a couple of days ago, a girl raised her hand and said, why didn't God just create us so that, so we couldn't sin? So there's no possibility that we would, eat the fruit, defy him, break the covenant, and so on. So we'd have to be. And I said, if he did that, then we wouldn't have a free will. And if we did have a free will, we couldn't love. We'd essentially just be robots that were programmed to say, I love you, I love you, I love you. But that's very unsatisfying. I remember I was a lonely kid. I was a lonely, geeky adolescent, between the years of like 12 through 15 in that awkward stage of my life. My family was moving a lot, and all my older siblings left home. And my older siblings are a good deal older than me. Like my closest sibling is 6 years older. So within a space of like 2 years, they all left for college. And suddenly I was like an only child. And so I would console myself with my computer. And this is the early days of personal computing, and I had a personal computer, and I would program it to play games and to do things. And what I found very quickly was that the computer was no substitute for a friend. So I would program the computer to play games with me, and then I would play the game, and I'm like, this is no fun because I know what the computer's going to do. I know what the computer's going to do because I programmed it to do that. And so there's like, it was so unsatisfying. So I experienced that as like a 13-year-old.
The computer didn't love you.
My computer did not love me. My computer had no free choice, and it was no substitute for having a friend. And so God doesn't want to create robots. And again, if he had programmed us to have to love him, or the only thing that we could do is love him. And so what does God do? So he creates beings that have a real free will, that can really have the real possibility of choosing against him and choosing not to love him, because he wants to have beings that will accept his invitation to love him. And that's what we have as human beings. That's it's a story of our origin.
And because we have choice, that the natural consequence of that is sin.
That's right.
And suffering.
And evil. Right.
Evil.
So why is there evil in the world? Why is there suffering in the world? Well, it's a twofer. You can't have one without the other. If you're going to have a universe where love is possible, you also have to have a universe where suffering is possible. And then there's more to it, and this gets to be really powerful. Because you think about the nature of love. Okay, let's ponder the nature of love. And a lot of people have an intuition that love is at the foundation of reality. Like the Beatles, right? They had that song, All You Need Is Love. Okay, they weren't professional philosophers. They were artists and musicians. But we often recognize that artists and musicians often have intuitions about reality that are powerful, and the poets seem to will often intuit things about reality. That's why we love reading poetry. So the Beatles were poets and artists, and they had intuitions about reality, and I think they were onto something. With their kind of goofy, little bit cringy song. All You Need Is Love. What they're saying is that love is at the basis of reality. But let's ponder love, and if we think about love, we realize that if you love another person or another thing, but you get a lot of pleasure or a lot of good feedback from that act of love, that's not a very profound form of love, you know. So, you know, you love your girlfriend, but your girlfriend is really beautiful and really healthy, and you know, she does all kinds of great stuff for you, and you never really have to make any sacrifice for your girlfriend. It's like, that's not really profound love, right? What is more profound? Well, you know, the movie The Notebook. That's why people love the movie The Notebook, because it's a story about a guy and he's totally in love with this woman, but she's old and she's got amnesia and, you know, whatever, Alzheimer's or whatever, and can barely remember. And, you know, he does all this for this brief moment where she's lucid and they can experience that love. We say, wow, that's real love, right? That's our intuition as human beings. And Dr. Scott Hahn claims that he never said this, but I heard him say it, so I know he said it. And he put it so well during one of his talks that I heard years ago. He said that, let me think about this, make sure I get this right, that suffering without love is unbearable, but love without suffering is impossible. That gets at the heart of reality, okay? So God is love, self-giving love, and then free choice. The free choice is necessary for the possibility of love, but the dark side of free choice is the possibility of doing wrong, of sin, which leads to suffering and evil. But then this is a mystery that love is purified. And love becomes its greatest self. Like, love manifests itself as love. Love is perfected when it undergoes suffering for the sake of the one who is loved. And so it's like a mysterious necessity that these mysterious realities of free choice and love and suffering all have to converge in a universe for love to be perfected. And that's at the heart of the mystery of the human condition and of the reality that we experience in this universe that we're in. And it starts to make sense, you know. And this is what the Catholic faith has been telling us for 2,000 years, long before we had quantum mechanics and the Big Bang and these other things that are pointing to the truth of these realities that we've been told all this time. I think it all comes together, science and religion, specifically the Catholic faith. What we're being told by both our faith and by our reasoned observation of the universe, like, converge. And we could throw in psychology and philosophy. Like, I think there's a profound sense of truth. This all converges, all telling us the same thing, that there is an all-powerful, loving intelligence out there that brought everything into existence so that he could share his love with us. And the necessity, us being created as creatures that can love necessitates the dark aspects of reality that sometimes cause us to doubt the existence of God, the reality of evil, the reality of suffering, the reality of broken commitments, all that, so on, rejection of love, but then also that darkness also provides the opportunity for our love to be perfected and to become the greatest manifestation of itself. It creates the conditions of possibility for the most mind-blowing goods. And it would be a shallow universe if there was no suffering, right? Like if, and we all have this experience. So, you go to wealthy suburbs and you hang around with teenagers in wealthy suburbs who've always had everything handed to them on a plate by their parents. Their parents are uber wealthy, never really had any kind of serious suffering yet in their lives. And you hang around them, and is that very satisfying? It's like, no. It's like, these are really shallow human beings. But we give them the benefit of the doubt. It's like, okay, look, it's a stage of life. They're going to grow up. Eventually they're going to have to suffer. They'll mature, right? But if God created a universe with no suffering and with no evil, I think the potential would be there for us to be like a race of shallow adolescents who never become very self-sacrificial, never really grow in wisdom, never become very much like God is himself, because we never had to suffer or undergo anything. And so I think it starts to make sense. Yeah, God creates a universe where there are beings who can come to really a profound love of him and a profound love of each other. And that's a greater good than creating a kind of trite, cringy universe where everything is like a, Barbie world,
There's no good movies, there's no good stories without overcoming some form of hardship, adversity, suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And that speaks to the human condition.
There's an entrepreneur that I really like, and I follow a lot of his stuff online. His name is Alex Hormozy, and one time he was describing this example, and this really stuck with me. He's like, if you're going to create the strongest human being that you possibly could, put him in a fishbowl, put him in an environment, right? And you have the choice as to what environment you're putting that person in to make them strong, to make them effective and capable and competent. Virtue. Would you give them just a totally comfortable, pleasurable environment, or would you give them something, adversity, hardship, suffering that they had to overcome in order to build themselves up? We know exactly what the answer to that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So along those lines, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who came across a viral clip of him, he has an argument from suffering claiming that God is all powerful and all good. The evidence against that is suffering within the world. So the evidence against God being all powerful and all good is that there is suffering in the world. You have children getting leukemia. You have tsunamis killing hundreds of thousands of people. So he's using suffering as evidence that God is not all good.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's the biggest argument. I mean, I think that's the biggest existential argument of God. It's not so much a rational argument against God. It is kind of like a visceral, emotional argument against God. Right. And I think that we all feel it, and I've certainly felt it at times. And some people feel that argument and then capitulate to it. I think that intellectually we've just given the answer already. We've just explained that suffering is necessary for love. That will not always work emotionally when people are going through suffering, though.
Hard suffering.
Yeah, hard suffering. But I do find a lot of encouragement. You mentioned Viktor Frankl in the book that you're writing, and 100% on Viktor Frankl. I encountered him in my sophomore year of college when I was taking a psychology course, and my psychology professor looked at my record, and I had a really good academic record. He said, you're not the typical student. I'm going to give you some freedom to just study what you want. And you could kind of this could be a self-study course for you. So, went on, I asked for some suggestions. He said, why don't you look into this thing, logotherapy? It's founder Viktor Frankl. So I got his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Apart from the Bible, that may be the most powerful book that I've ever read in my life.
Same. Yep.
Yeah.
Same.
It's at least got to be the top 5. And that book absolutely convinced me that materialism is false, that we're not just matter and energy, that we have what we typically call a soul, and that human beings, Nietzsche's argument was that the fundamental desire of the human person was power, and so it was a power philosophy. And of course that was manifest politically in Nazism. And then Freud argued that the fundamental desire of the human being was sexual pleasure, and that's basically the sexual revolution is the product of Freud's thought. But opposed to them is Frankl, and I think Frankl hit it correctly. And his argument is man's fundamental urge is for meaning. But meaning,
purpose and meaning, central human motivational force.
That gets to love, That gets to love. Because when we start unpacking, what does he mean when he says that we want meaning? It's finally going to come out that what we're looking for is love. Mm-hmm. And because, we're looking for communion with other persons, and if you, and the more, you say people find a meaning in life, it's like, well, what does it mean? Well, I want to do something with my life. I want to give back. I want to make the world a better place. You unpack what they mean. It's like they want to do something to benefit other people. Mm-hmm. And that's an expression of charity. That's an expression of love. They want to make their lives a powerful act of love that is going to touch other people. And so we talk about,
which is in alignment with everything that we've talked about in this conversation. It's an alignment with how and why everything was created in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we spoke too fast about Frankl because not everybody listening is going to know who Frankl was or what he went through. So let me just recap, as we both know, amazing Austrian psychiatrist, Jewish, captured by the Nazis in the Anschluss when they took over Austria, sent to Auschwitz. And then he, with his psychiatric mind, he kind of observed while he was in Auschwitz what was going on around him, and he managed to survive himself. And he looked at those who survived, and he discovered that if people had a reason to live, if they had meaning in their life, if they were like trying to get out of Auschwitz so they could get reunited with their family or with their wife, or they had some other person that they were living for, people could survive the most incredible atrocities, just like, it's really miraculously survive, in ways that almost defy physics. Like, survive for so long on a diet that was not providing enough calories that, like, biologically they should have been able to live. Like, really do superhuman things.
They could endure the worst human suffering possible.
They absolutely could, and they would do it. They would do it because there was a meaning. They were living for love, essentially. Yep. And then Frankl also observed that if people lost meaning, they would almost die immediately. Like if something happened, like they were living to be reunited to their wife, and then they got a letter that their wife had died, and so that meaning had gone out of their life, they're like die within days. Yep. And so he found that what gave people the power to survive was meaning. And he came to the conclusion that our fundamental desire as human beings is meaning. And like I said, I would unpack that as love. But it's so powerful. And, yeah. It's a gripping book because it's his personal story. And it just makes, like, Neil deGrasse Tyson sound so trite. It's like, Neil, please read Viktor Frankl. Okay. We've all been through this, Jordan Peterson, you and I, others, we've fought, Neil, with that problem of evil, and we're still fighting with it. I have a son, who's struggling for his life with brain cancer. Okay. July 18, he ran downstairs with a headache. He was writhing around the couch. I said, this is not normal. Ran to the emergency room. His brain is bleeding. Within an hour, we're being life flighted to the children's hospital. Okay. And my son is in the throes of a life and death battle right now with brain cancer. And we're, constantly praying and doing everything that we can biologically, to put him in the best place to survive. And there's a lot of there's a lot of suffering involved in that. I don't want to be overly mawkish and get tied into that, but we have all had suffering, So Neil, it's not like we don't it's not like we as religious believers, Neil, don't understand what suffering is like and haven't undergone it. Okay, but we've
And it
thought
felt
about
like it
it.
doesn't make us question our faith either.
Right. And it doesn't mean it doesn't put us through dark places.
Yeah.
And entire books of the Bible are written about this. The book of Job, is an entire exploration of this. But the problem is if you just give up, then you're lost in nihilism and meaninglessness. And there's something naturally abhorrent about that in our person. And we're like, well, that's awful, And so the only positive way of handling that is to place one's faith in God and to trust in the darkness when you can't see rationally or logically, maybe in all circumstances, how this could ever possibly be meaningful. Okay, the only positive way to deal with this is to place one's trust that God, the Creator, for which we have rational reasons to believe, and that we've been talking about that for 2 hours, okay, can bring some kind of good out of the suffering.
Yeah.
And the alternative is capitulation to misery and meaninglessness. Okay, even if there wasn't strong evidence to believe in a God, even if say the chance of God's existence was only like 10%, I would still go with that rather than capitulate to meaninglessness and misery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't think it's anywhere near there, though. I think that the rational case for God's existence is close to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that if you don't acknowledge God's existence, it's kind of like you're kind of willfully resisting the cogency of the evidence. You're kind of like willfully running from what the evidence is pointing to. But there's a convergence then between what reason is telling us, which is that there is a God, and then the only positive way of existentially, personally dealing with suffering in our lives, which is to trust in a God.
Mm-hmm.
So reason and faith come together.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why I wanted to have that initial conversation with you, because we need to establish a foundation that we can base our life on, that we can buttress our life to when the storms come, when we inevitably experience suffering, hardship, adversity in our lives. And too many people are struggling right now in this world without that foundation.
Right. And I think
look at the state of the world. I mean, we talked about Frankl. Frankl identified the existential vacuum that exists when people don't have meaning and purpose in their lives.
Exactly.
And all those negative symptoms, mental health problems, sexual, rampant sexual, what is it? What does he say?
Acting out.
Promiscuity, throughout society.
Sure.
I mean, and that we're experiencing that clearly,
right,
everywhere.
Yeah. We're in a society that's a free fall that doesn't have kind of objective anchor points to sustain itself, and this is not sustainable. This is the interesting thing about Frankl is he's like, okay, if people have meaning, then they can endure anything. And so he got out of the camp and he went back into psychiatric practice after the war, and he developed what was called logotherapy, which is a psychiatric method that aimed at helping people find meaning in their suffering. But this is the problem that he ran into later, which is that you can't like trick yourself into thinking that there is meaning, and you can't like create your own meaning.
Mm-hmm.
This is the thing. Like the problem with it is because it's a trick. And he kind of had like psychiatric hacks where he would try to help people to find meaning. But if they didn't believe that there really was true realities that gave life meaning, you can't fake it psychologically. And so you're in this predicament where for the human being to be psychologically healthy, a human being has to have meaning. And yet for a human being to have meaning, there have to be objectively true facts about reality that give reality meaning. Because if there aren't objectively true facts about reality that provide meaning for reality, then the human being knows that, well, none of this is objectively true. I'm just playing mind games with myself. There isn't any meaning. I'm just like pretending that there's meaning. And then that's not psychiatrically helpful. So I had a student some years ago who did her senior thesis on Frankl. And I love her thesis, and I think that she's right. And what she argued was the Catholic faith provides the true anchor points that are truly true, like the fact that Jesus really did die on the cross in AD 33, and that he really was the God-man who worked miracles, etc. Okay, the Catholic faith provides those anchor points of really true facts that provide meaning to human existence, such that Frankl's logotherapy can work. And to put it in academic terms or philosophical terms, you need a metaphysics to support the psychiatric method. You need like a true worldview that is a framework. Okay, so you have meaning. And Jordan Peterson recognizes this. He's one of the great intellects of our time. He came to Franciscan University like 2 years ago, maybe now. Gave a talk on campus, and he basically said, to make moral judgments, you have to have a story about reality, and the only story about reality that really can serve for worldwide culture is actually the biblical story, and so we need to re-embrace the biblical story, whether it's factually true or not. We just need to embrace it so that we have a narrative that we can make value judgments. I think he's right on a lot, but you see, ultimately that fails unless the biblical story is true. And I think you got to make one more step. You have to make an act of faith, and you have to say, there's a lot of evidence to support the biblical story. I maybe can't demonstrate its proof, but that the last little bit, I'm going to have to make that act of faith, and I'm just going to have to accept this as true. And he's Peterson is still at the point of like a little bit like playing mind games. So it's like, well, I'll pretend the narrative is true so that I can make moral judgments and I can, operate in the world. But you got to move from pretending to embracing, and that's the act of faith.
Yeah, like Jordan Peterson's done such a phenomenal job in like helping me understand, especially the psychological significance and meaning of everything that the church teaches, or Christian belief, or the Bible, right?
Yeah, for which I'm very grateful and respect him.
100%. But you're right in the sense, like, did you watch the podcast that he just did with Richard Dawkins by any chance?
I haven't watched that yet. I got to catch that.
They get into a lot of that. Like Richard Dawkins would challenge Jordan Peterson. Like, do you believe that physically Jesus was born of a virgin? Like, scientifically, biologically, do you believe that this happened? Do you believe that Mary did not have intercourse with another man,
right,
and that Jesus was born of a virgin?
Right. And
he kind of, and he did the whole thing. He was like, well, I believe in what it means, right?
Or he tried to dance around it.
Well, he wasn't gonna answer. I mean, he basically ended it saying, like, I don't know. He wasn't gonna commit to it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You
Same
gotta
thing
commit
with the resurrection, right?
You gotta commit to miracles.
100%.
But this is the thing, quantum mechanics. Our world is much more mysterious than people think. People are working with what's called a classical or Newtonian view of the universe, where they think that everything's determined by atoms. Atoms are all like billiard balls in space, and there's no role for mind to influence what happens. But that's not reality. That's a false view of the universe. And you take a more open view of the universe, that mind and physical reality are interactive, or like we were talking about earlier, there's top people in philosophy and in physics who've moved to the position that, we're in a non-local universe where it's minds, and our minds, this is kind of like a virtual reality, of interaction of minds. Well, if you take that view of reality, then miracles are not a problem, because mind can be causative. And so we got to get rid of the classical Newtonian universe, and we got to embrace the universe that quantum mechanics presents us, that's interactive between mind and physical reality. And then miracles become a possibility, and then the Bible becomes a possibility, right. and then human flourishing becomes a possibility.
Right.
Right. So this is, but John Paul II, it was just his feast day, but he was like, faith and reason are like two lungs, and two wings of the bird, and you need them both. And so when I go through hardship and suffering, it helps that I know a lot of rational reasons of why it's very reasonable, logical, even compelling to believe in a God. But it also helps that I have my faith formation. I have the revelation of Scripture. Both those things help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that folks that have only their faith formation, if their faith is very strong, they can get through suffering. But I think it does really help to have some intellectual formation and to have some assurance that, my faith is not a bunch of wishful thinking.
Mm-hmm.
There's really reasoning that supports my faith. I think that's very helpful to people to be able to think through the issues and come to the point that they can see for themselves. Yeah, there's pretty powerful reasons to believe in a God. There's pretty powerful reasons to believe in a personal God, to believe in a God who's loving, and the nature of free will and love explains suffering. That's helpful to individuals. People that are very strong in their faith can maybe, as it were, muscle through times of suffering just by the brute force of their faith. But for a lot of the rest of us, it does help to have the assistance of reason. And that's why God gives us thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and other great intellectuals of the church. Father Spitzer is doing great work on this in the modern day. I don't know if you're familiar with his work in the Magus Institute and so on, but others as well. It is helpful.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess the last thing that I'll ask you, and we can start to wrap up here. We already went over a little bit of the time that I thought we were going to go. But like I said in the initial question, I want to bring all of what we've been talking about down to the individual level and individual vocation and purpose.
Right.
We talked about how important that was as highlighted by Frankl's experience and what he observed. What is, I guess you can say, the individual purpose of human beings, and then how do each one of us discern that within our own lives and then bring that into reality?
Right. Well, I think that even we from disciplined reflection on nature, we can come to the conclusion that there's an all-powerful intelligence out there that planned us and wanted us to come to think about him and reflect him and try to come into union with him. We can get that far with reason. And then we have to start looking at, well, did he try to communicate with us? And then we look around at human history, and like the best case for somebody who is communicating to us from God really is Jesus Christ. He stands head and shoulders above every other founder of a philosophy, a sect, or a religion. Muhammad never performed any miracles, nor did he rise from the dead. Neither did Buddha. And I'm a professional Bible scholar, and even in New Testament studies, I know of secular Bible scholars who really aren't much of a believer themselves, but they study the New Testament as ancient literature, and maybe not a majority of those folks, but some significant numbers of those people are willing to say, you know what, you gotta concede that Jesus was a miracle worker, because you just can't explain all of the literary evidence that he was, all these stories, all these traditions, and so on. So it's really interesting to see that even secular Bible scholars are like, yeah, you just gotta, yeah, for sure he worked miracles. They're not willing to say he's God. They're not willing. They don't bother to explain it. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, he worked miracles. Yeah,
something special about this guy.
There's just something special about this guy. You really can't explain the Gospels as just like fictions, So anyway, getting back, reason brings you a long way. Like, I'm intended, like a creator designed this for us and for me to be in a relationship. And of all the people in world history who have credentials to maybe be speaking on behalf of that creator, Jesus Christ stands head and shoulders above all the rest. And then read the accounts of his personal students, which is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were his students, or maybe once removed students of students, in the case of Mark and Luke.
Mm-hmm.
read the works of his students and what they record about what he said and how he taught to live, and what Jesus says to us is kind of confirms where we got by reason alone, which is that, yes, absolutely, God loves you. He created you out of love. He created this universe to enter into relationship with you. And he loves each one of us so much that he took on our nature and was willing to suffer abuse from mankind, from us, in order to demonstrate his love for us and to communicate to us that he has a personal plan for each one of our lives. And that there's some contribution that each one of us has to make for human good and for the flowering of love, a particular thing that each one of us has that we can contribute to this big tapestry that's being woven by the history of the human race, and it's exciting. I mean, like coming to that discovery, like breathes energy into your life. It's like, yeah, I'm placed here by a loving Creator, and He's got a plan. He's got something for me to do, and I just got to figure out what it is. And I can do that with the help of those around me, and by praying to Him and by reflecting on His Word. I can look at my gifts, and I can use my reason, and I can use my heart, and I can use His revelation, which is the Scriptures, and He'll lead me to figure out what it is that I'm here to do, and then I can find fulfillment and joy and bring fulfillment and joy to other people by leading into that and by embracing that. I mean, that's like fantastic. That gives energy. That gives vitality. Like,
Yes.
gives you like a bounce in your step. It's like you want to get up in the morning,
Yeah.
so I can get back at what this plan that I have from the Creator of the universe to fulfill my role here. Just breathes excitement into life. That's much more passionate. I would much rather take that than this worldview that Neil deGrasse Tyson is giving me. Is like, oh yeah, well, maybe I could find reasons to believe that the world is meaningless. Like, why? That's not much fun. Like, if everything's meaningless, why get up in the morning?
Yeah. Yeah.
The only benefit of that worldview is that, like, it excuses illicit pleasures. Like, so maybe I don't want to. Maybe I don't want to have my conscience bother me if I'm like just sleep around with a bunch of people and like make, use people and throw myself into, substance abuse or whatever. And maybe I want to throw myself into all those kind of like physical pleasures without the nagging of conscience. That's the only benefit that I see from that atheistic, meaningless worldview, is that it allows you to engage in physical pleasures without having the pangs of conscience. I don't think it's successful. I think conscience
It's still not sustainable, though.
Yeah, I think
still
conscience
suffer
still asserts
consequences.
itself.
Yeah.
And then you experience all kinds of misery like Diddy, Sean Combs is doing. So he threw himself into the Playboy lifestyle, and now he's living a regret, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
And it isn't just like now he's living regret. I would argue that that Diddy was in misery even when he was doing all those parties and stuff. That's all coming out now, making use of people for his own pleasure. That was miserable, but he kept doing it because it's like when you're a drug addict, you think that the drug is going to make you feel better, even though the more you use it, the less effect it has. You keep going back for the bigger hit. He kept trying to salve the ache in his soul by having wilder and wilder parties. And and St. Paul describes that kind of behavior actually in Romans chapter 1. Anyway, so I got off track. Bringing it back. So I mean, it's beautiful. And I think that, Zach, one of the great things about our time is that advances in science, advances in philosophy, allow us to really have a complete picture now with what we see from looking at the universe and thinking about it agrees with what our faith tells us, and we can have a coherent, like, Christian worldview, a coherent, specifically Catholic worldview that is energizing and that offers the vision of human flourishing, of the individual, of flourishing of families. despite suffering and even through suffering. This is powerful. The resources of the Catholic faith to handle suffering are amazing. And this is one of the things that attracted my wife and I. We're converts from a different form of Christianity that did not have as robust an understanding of the purpose of suffering in the human life. Our view of Jesus and our form of Christianity that we grew up with was that Jesus suffered so that we didn't have to suffer. But then you're gonna suffer. Every human being is gonna suffer. And then the problem was that within our form of Christianity, we didn't really have the resources to understand what was God doing in our lives when suffering actually came. Because this shouldn't be happening. Jesus suffered for me, so why am I suffering? But the Catholic faith tells us, no, it's not quite right. Yes, Jesus suffered for you, but he did that to empower your sufferings so that when you suffer, you can join it with his, and it becomes divine. And it has this mysterious and divine quality that leads to your salvation, that leads to your holiness. It leads to being joined to God.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Father James Serby, said that Christ gave suffering meaning.
Yeah, he came to infuse suffering with meaning.
Yep.
And boy, did he do it well.
Yep.
And that's so powerful. So rather than using suffering as an excuse or an intellectual objection to avoid embracing the reality of a God, I think what the Catholic faith is offering us is so much more satisfying. It's like, no. Catholic faith says, no, look, we can breathe meaning into that suffering. That suffering can become the path of salvation. That suffering can become the path for the greatest expressions of human love ever. Things like Maximilian Kolbe and other great saints, who perfected their love through suffering. And that really stirs us. And this speaks to us deeply and profoundly. And something deep inside of us says, yes, that's right. Yeah. That's inspiring.
Right.
So and I think that's a testimony, from something that's non-rational, but simply because it's non-rational doesn't mean that it isn't profound or like a powerful, piece of evidence for the truth.
Well, I think that's the opportunity that the church really has in our modern time. Right. It's that depth and mystery that people are craving right now.
Right.
Like they're desperate for it.
Right.
Absolutely. That's why, I've been waiting my whole life for the Catholic faith to be cool. And I feel like it's becoming cool.
It's becoming cool.
Yeah.
It is, because people are hitting rock bottom.
Yeah.
And I think looking back on it now, Zach, as we're talking, I begin to see how God has brought good out of what was called the new atheism. It's becoming passé now, but like 20 years ago, Richard Dawkins and the other four horsemen of the apocalypse, they called themselves. I can't remember all the names of the other.
Sam Harris, Dawkins. I forget the other ones. Yeah.
Maybe Daniel Dennett was in the mix. I forget, but he certainly was a kindred soul to the rest of them. Professional philosopher, but anyway. Those, that wave of new atheism, and it was so strong that Dr. Hahn and I, who were teaching at Franciscan University at the time, we were losing students to atheism, even on the campus of Franciscan University, which is one of the most devout places, in the country, and we were freaking out. And I, for a while, I felt like the world was coming down around my head. Like this is going to be, the end of the church. Not really. I didn't last that way for long, but. Anyway, but there started to become a response. But one of the good things that came out of the new atheism is a lot of people followed Dawkins and followed Sam Harris and so on into that whole milieu and that whole worldview. And they've been in it now for a couple of decades now. And they're becoming exhausted with it. They're seeing its real limitations. And I think that some of those people are now coming back and seeking out Catholicism. And why specifically Catholicism? Well, this is another podcast that we could do sometime about like why I became Catholic. But I mean, the Catholic Church rocks when it comes to certainty and truth and teaching the same thing with the wind and the waves of time, over centuries and over millennia. And other forms of Christianity can't even last decades. Within my lifetime, I've seen new forms of Christianity arise, flourish, become hip, popular, and look like they are the new thing, and then age, wither, and die within a space of 30 years, But they weren't there when I was born, and now they're already over, So, but Catholicism, I mean, it's still, reports of the death of Catholicism are greatly exaggerated. Like, don't bet against the Catholic Church. It has outlasted every empire, every philosophical movement, everything since the ministry of Jesus Christ, and it is still going on. And like you said, it's becoming hip and popular. Where public figures are associating with it, or speaking favorably of it, or converting themselves and embracing it. And why? So, well, with all the meaninglessness and the stupidity of our culture, which is becoming increasingly evident to everybody, and like the sham of the news media is becoming more and more obvious with almost like every passing day, and so on.
Yeah,
and then
it gives me a lot of content.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then you walk into a Catholic church, and just the visuals in a Catholic church are all speaking to you about profound meaning. Like, I was just, as I mentioned, I went to Mass before the podcast over at St. Joseph in Herndon, Virginia. And I walked in, and right at the center of this huge room, you cannot miss, like, what your eye immediately is gravitated to is this monster guy being killed at the front of the room. There's a sculpture of this guy being executed on this monster piece of wood. And it's casting a shadow across the back wall because the sun is streaming in, shining light on this guy. This guy's being tortured to death. Like, who on earth goes to worship, where at the front of their place of worship is this guy being tortured to death? Like, what kind of craziness is going on there? But you've got it around your neck too, and but the crucifix is the greatest meaning source in like all of human culture. Like everything that we've been talking about for this whole podcast is like concentrated into the crucifix. Because there you have love, and there you have free choice, and there you have suffering, and there you have the creator of the universe, and everything. It's like all compressed.
Purpose.
And people are coming to figure it out. It's like, holy cow, this is the answer to the existential crisis of meaninglessness. Everything in a Catholic sanctuary is so full of meaning. My brother converted to Catholicism a year after I did. And then we were talking together about 6 months after his conversion, after he came out at the Easter Vigil the year after I did. And we're talking, and I'll never forget something that my brother said, he has a degree in philosophy, and then he was trained at the seminary, and he's also got a doctorate in natural science. He's got a doctorate in botany, so in hard sciences, and he makes a living as a pharmaceutical statistician. So like all the number crunching, he's got a brain on him, my brother. Anyway, my brother said to me, John, as a Catholic, I can't get over the fact that as a Catholic, everything is so real. Like, wow, what a thing to say. But to unpack, what did he mean by, like, when you become Catholic, everything becomes so real? Well, one of the things he means is that everything becomes infused with meaning. Like, even the small acts of your day can be acts of love. You can learn to make coffee and fix breakfast in ways that, you're making little self-sacrifices as you're doing it. You're not adding sugar to your coffee because you're making a little sacrifice, and then you're offering that as a little prayer, a little act of mortification, and then you put a little effort into making the coffee because you're trying to make it nice for your wife. It's a little act of charity. So like even the little, like the fabric of the day can be infused with love. Like St. Teresa of Calcutta said, very few of us can make great acts of love, but we can do, I don't know. What'd she say? No, very few of us can make great acts, great, powerful things in world history, but we can do small things with great love, she said. And I'm, slaughtering her statement. And somebody's going to correct us like, gosh, Bergsma can't remember anything. And here's the actual quote. But that was the point of it. We can't do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And she's absolutely right. And that infuses everything with meaning, and it makes everything so real. So, well, anyway, we could continue indefinitely on this, but I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I would love to maybe do another one on, we can get into the weeds and the depth of the Catholic Church.
Sure.
Another time. But
yep.
Yeah, I think that's good. So thank you for coming. I appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Yeah, this is tremendous. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of do this whole exploration from atheism to Catholicism and back again, and scout out the whole territory, and hopefully help some other people too.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah.
Dr. Bergsma, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Zach.